Good morning, everybody. Good morning online. I really appreciate you all being here. Today, I was ambitious, and so I'm going to talk about Buddha nature. It's been asked about in a few of the talks I've given over the last chunk of time. So I thought I would tackle it, even though in a lot of ways, I sometimes think that trying to define Buddha nature can be a waste of time. Because we can get caught up on examples that seem to indicate a thingness, or we can get caught in circles about what Buddha nature is not. At the same time, it's something worth talking about, both because it's very important, if sometimes controversial in Buddhism, but also because some of the common misunderstandings can lead us down a wrong path in practice. And I'm definitely going to be talking about this mostly from a practice point of view, although, as Sandy says, I am a geek and cannot help sneak a little academic stuff in there. Buddha nature has been described and understood differently throughout time and cultures in different schools. So it's definitely worth briefly reviewing the evolution, but I promise this talk will not be one big history lecture.
Egan, you're muted.
So one thing I'm going to ask us to all keep in mind as we go, and I'm going to remind us repeatedly throughout this talk, is that Buddha nature is not a thing, a substance, or a soul. Okay? It's very important. To understand the teaching of Buddha nature, I think it's helpful to reflect on the view of human nature in original Buddhism as we get it from the Pali Canon. Original Buddhism recommends the Buddhist path to everyone, but there's no guarantee you're going to achieve liberation in this lifetime. The practice of the path is tough, and to achieve complete liberation, you must practice as a monastic, according to early Buddhism. Buddhism evolved in the context of the belief in rebirth, so it was assumed you would have many lifetimes to work on this spiritual path. So if you're a layperson, it was okay. Maybe you'd be born able to be a monastic in the next life. Right? This is important because some people were considered to be so deluded or not on the monastic path, so they weren't really able to achieve realization. Right? This is a thought process in early Buddhism. And so Buddhism seemed to view human nature as not having an essential nature per se, because the teachings of anatta, non-self, means there's no bedrock self to be found. But based on your actions and your experience in previous lives, our birth isn't completely a blank slate. We're bringing that kind of karmic momentum forward into this life. And then after we're born, we might get worked on actually by more conditioning and come under the influence of the poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. We further shape our body and mind through our actions. And this kind of karmic cycle keeps us reborn over and over and over again, right? This is the way the human experience was understood. And so according to original Buddhist teachings, practice has to counteract all of this conditioning and kind of karmic momentum accumulated over lifetimes. And practice purifies us until we reach a liberated state where we're no longer subject to greed, hate, and delusion and karmic repercussions, and we get off the wheel of birth and death. This is very different than the way Zen talks about the human experience, but it's, I think, important to understand this as we're looking at how Buddha nature develops. Buddha nature is a relatively late comer to the Buddhist scene. It doesn't really show up until the people debate 1st through 3rd, 4th century CE, so quite a bit later. And it arose, among other things, it seems, as a way to explain how an enlightened being could come out of this samsara world. This makes sense as a question to ask, because if we are of this world and we are in this cyclical suffering and rebirth, and there isn't an essential nature, what compels us or gives us the capacity to practice or to wake up? And so people are asking this question, how do we even do it, right? And so Buddha nature, this concept of Buddha nature is kind of one way to explain this, right? There's other stuff that goes into it, but you guys are getting the highlights. So with this kind of, you can see there's already a little bit of an inherent tension, right? And Buddha nature can be extremely difficult to understand, not because we're stupid, or even that Buddha nature is necessarily complicated, but because human minds, we tend to be binary thinkers. We tend to be black and white, right? We tend to be kind of dualistic in our thinking. We figure there's either a thing called Buddha nature or there's not a thing called Buddha nature. If it exists, it has to be a thing with thing-like qualities. And if, as the Buddha says in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, Buddha nature is eternal and can't be destroyed, and we have it, then we might go, oh, well, there must be like a soul, right? Like, I think you could see where this not quite right idea might show up, especially if we're thinking it either exists or it doesn't, right? But the Buddha taught that there's no such thing as an eternal soul. We are composed of the five skandhas. The skandhas are conditioned and impermanent. There is no eternal essence or soul that is fixed and separate from the rest of reality. And even the skandhas, by this time, those are also going to kind of disengage as we pass on. So we have this idea that Buddha nature exists, it cannot be destroyed, and there's no eternal essential self. Like, so, oh, like how do we navigate this? And so we really have to pay attention to this black and white thinking, or we're going to go way off in the left field, right? So like I said, Buddha nature, it's a Mahayana teaching, and it doesn't show up really in early Theravada Buddhism. Some later Buddhist scholars have found justification for at least the seeds of the Buddha nature idea in the Pali Canon, such as the Anguttara Nikaya Sutta. The Buddha is quoted as saying, luminous monks is the mind, but sometimes it is defiled by advantageous defilements. Sometimes it is free from defilements. And so they went, oh, luminous mind. That sounds like proto-Buddha nature language. And so some scholars have said that that's our justification from the Pali Canon, right? But even Buddha nature, we have some trouble because Buddha nature in English is translated for a few different terms. It's not actually just one. Buddha nature is a common English translation for Tathagata Garbha, which is usually like Buddha womb or embryo, or Buddha Dhatu, which is kind of Buddha essence. So Buddha nature as a translation is used for more than one term, right? So that is definitely not helping our clarity of understanding sometimes, especially if we don't know that. So the concept of Tathagata Garbha as a womb or embryo of a Buddha gives us a pretty clear vision of one of the ways that Buddha nature has been understood, which is the potential for realization, right? Potential for realization. And when you start looking at the sutras that are called the Tathagata Garbha Sutras, you see kind of 9 metaphor or simile explanations of this kind of innate potential. And all of these traditional explanations give different metaphors for Buddha nature, but also talk about different pitfalls of human nature that keep us from seeing it, this own true nature. And I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll give you one. As I was telling Shinchu, when I started writing this, I ended up with way too much and had to cut it down. So we're gonna have to stick with one example today on the different similes, which is the first one. So in one of the examples, Buddha essence resembles gold buried in filth. If someone accidentally drops gold into a pile of filthy refuse at the side of the road, we don't know it's there, let alone to think to take it out and clean it and use it. Similarly, while our gold-like Buddha essence is not mixed with defilements, the filth of the manifest coarse 3 poisons prevents us from seeing it. So in this example, Buddha nature was always there, but it was like a gold statue that got dropped in the horse manure. And it doesn't do anybody any good because we don't know it's there. The horse manure isn't hurting the golden statue, but until we actually get it out and clean it off, it doesn't help us out very much. One thing I want to bring your attention to here is that this idea of Buddha embryo or Buddha potential is a little different than how we talk about Buddha nature in Zen. But what we do see is that even this version of Buddha nature, it's still not something outside of ourselves we have to go get. We don't have to turn into something else. We don't have to make the golden statue. It's saying it's in there, but it's like a golden statue that got dropped in filth. That's really important. This is a different way of understanding than the way we talk about it in Zen, but it's still saying you don't have to go somewhere else. You don't have to turn into something else. You don't have to make it occur, right? It exists, right? It's present. And so there are some pitfalls to these kinds of poetic examples. The other one that I really liked was like honey in a beehive. You have to reach past the bees and get it. And I like that one because that one's talking about being cranky. The bees represent crankiness, and that's my thing. So, yeah. But whether we're talking about the golden statue or the honey in the beehive, it would be very easy to listen to the simile of the golden Buddha statue being covered in muck and take away that there is a thing called Buddha nature inside of us. And it's not too far from there to extrapolate a soul, right? I mean, I think that's a pretty clear pitfall to this kind of language. But that is not what is being expressed here. There is no thing, there is no soul, there's no fixed or eternal self or substance that we can point to as Buddha nature. The simile of the golden Buddha is about the characteristic of always being present. The characteristic of always being present, not an essence. If we go back to that quote about the luminous nature of the mind, right? The mind is luminous. Luminosity is a characteristic of the functioning of the mind. You cannot grab luminous. I can't own luminous and take it home with me, right? A mind cannot have luminosity as a possession. It is a characteristic of the functioning. So even in these early descriptions of Buddha nature that tend to focus on it more as a potential for realization, we clearly see that it's not a soul or an essence or a thing, but a characteristic of the functioning. So although Buddha nature initially developed independent of kind of these two major schools of Buddhism, it's worth mentioning that two schools are credited with a lot of the development of kind of Buddha nature thought. And that's the Yogacara and the Madhyamaka schools. And so a lot of what we're going to see as we look at like the evolution is going to be coming from or a reaction against the thoughts that are coming out of these schools. So Yogacara is a school of Buddhist philosophy that focuses on how our mind creates and experiences reality. It's sometimes called the mind-only school because it teaches that what we experience in the world is deeply shaped by our consciousness. Yogacara posits this kind of like storehouse consciousness. You might have heard this concept before. And this is like at your deepest level of mind and consciousness. It's kind of like a mental storage, right? You engage in an action and it plants a karmic seed way down there. And then that seed's going to ripen. So what you engage in now is going to kind of flavor what you're going to be experiencing later. And what you've already engaged in is flavoring what you're experiencing now. Universal conscious, storehouse consciousness is not some kind of like a universal consciousness or a group mind kind of thing. That's not what it is. It's just a really deep layer of your human experience that is kind of getting seeds and planted and sprouting all the time, right? So from their point of view, in ordinary beings, this storehouse is clouded by ignorance and attachment, giving rise to samsara, the cycle of suffering. And Yogacara also teaches that the same consciousness, when purified of defilements, reveals its original clarity and luminosity, which is Buddha nature. So you can see it's still not an essence or a soul, but they're saying that there is something that we work on. And when we've kind of clarified it to a certain point, this is Buddha nature, right? It was always there, but we had to clarify it for it to be kind of like relevant or meaningful. Thus, Buddha nature is not something separate or hidden. It's the pure awakened aspect of the storehouse consciousness. And I am giving you just the highlights of these schools because we would be here for several weeks if I. So the Madhyamaka is sometimes called the emptiness school. All phenomena lack inherent or independent existence. Everything is dependently originated and arises from a web of causes and conditions. Emptiness is not a void of nothingness, but rather the absence of an essential independent nature. So for the Madhyamaka school, Buddha nature is not an eternal inherent self within each person, but is synonymous with emptiness. And now we're starting to get a little closer to what you've probably heard in Zen. It is the potential for awakening that exists because all phenomena, including the mind, lack a permanent intrinsic nature. Because no person or thing has an unchanging self, they are not fixed entities. And the very absence of an intrinsic fixed nature or emptiness is what makes change and transformation, including the transformation into a Buddha, possible. So this is where we're starting to get where Buddha nature and emptiness are the same. If you were fixed, if you were solid, especially if you were fixed, separate from the rest of reality, being, no change, meaning no waking up would be possible. So by the very nature of the ability to change, that's Buddha nature, right? We're getting there, right? We're slowly zeroing in. And so this is really important. And it's going to show up again and again. It's going to show up in Chinese and Zen Buddhism. Impermanence and emptiness are the Buddha nature because we can only wake up due to the fact that we change. If we were solid and fixed, cut off from the rest of reality, we couldn't change to experience and embody our own essential nature. So the Mahaparinirvana Sutra has the widest impact in terms of Buddha nature thought in China, right? Remember, by the time we get into this time period, China is really the mothership of Buddhism, and then it's going to spread through Korea and up into Japan. So not long after its appearance, scholars and practitioners merged its teaching with something that was already in Chinese Buddhism at the time, which is the doctrine of sudden enlightenment. Sudden enlightenment holds that enlightenment is not kind of a causal thing that requires years and years of tough practice. One need only recognize one's own natural state. Universal Buddha nature, defined as that natural state, therefore had obvious appeal to the sudden enlightenment school. Right? If realization is seeing the truth of your own empty of inherent existence nature, you can see where this is different than I have to work hard to purify something, and that might be waking up at some point, right? It's different. And like hopefully everybody can see we're starting to see little hints, little pieces of things that we talk about in Zen. Like it's all starting to do this. So the major Japanese traditions all take the idea of Buddha nature as a central teaching, from Tendai and Shingon to other schools. One of the most important developments of Buddha nature thought in Japanese Buddhism is called Hongaku, which is innate or original enlightenment. And this developed in the Tendai school, which both Dogen, our founder, and the founder of Rinzai Zen came from. Right? This is important. It's all kind of in our family tree. The Tendai doctrine held enlightenment was inherent from the outset as accessible in the present rather than the process of a fruit of long cultivation. And this makes sense. If the nature of changeability, if empty of inherent existence, if impermanence is Buddha nature, it's there the whole time, right? These ideas, they support each other, they meet, they come together, they make sense. It was often held that Hongaku, this inherent enlightenment, was a feature of all phenomena, including plants and inanimate objects. So all things are Buddha nature. I think we've all heard that before. All things are Buddha nature. And this brings me to a pretty famous koan. I think probably most of you have heard it. It's the koan called Mu. Someone asked their teacher, does a dog have Buddha nature? And the response was Mu. But it's important to know that in Chinese, the response was Wu. And in Chinese, Wu is the sound that dogs make. So it's not just saying no. It's like if somebody asked one of our teachers here and they went, woof, right? And it's not absurdity. It's the question is incorrect, right? Does a dog have Buddha nature? That's the wrong question, right? We're back to that dualistic thinking. Is there a dog that has a thing called Buddha nature? That's not right, right? So the question is formulated incorrectly. So on one hand, it's not the no of dog has no Buddha nature. It's the no of wrong question. And I like to think, go pet a dog. Real, go pet a dog, right? Not philosophical, go pet a dog. This life, all things, Buddha nature, right now, right? Important. So I've always taken this as both, you're not formulating the question correctly and get out of your own head and go pet a dog. So the founder of our school of Zen, Dogen, held that Buddha nature was simply the true nature of reality and being. This true nature was just impermanence, becoming, and vast emptiness. Because Dogen saw the whole universe as an expression of Buddha nature, he held that even grass and trees are Buddha nature. So I'm going to give you the first actual quote. So according to Dogen, therefore, the very impermanency of grass and trees, thicket and forest is the Buddha nature. The very impermanency of men and things, body and mind, is the Buddha nature. Nature and lands, mountains and rivers are impermanent. Because they are the Buddha nature, supreme and complete enlightenment, because it is impermanent, is the Buddha nature. I'm going to read that again, a little slower. Therefore, the very impermanency of grass and tree, thicket and forest is the Buddha nature. The very impermanency of men and things, body and mind, is the Buddha nature. Nature and lands, mountains and rivers are impermanent because they are the Buddha nature. Supreme and complete enlightenment, because it is impermanent, is the Buddha nature. I really like that. And that's from the Nishijima Cross translation. So if you want to go find it, you might have to look up to get that exact wording, but it's all pretty close. So Dogen is pointing again to the idea that Buddha nature, the functioning of impermanence, are not separate. Waking up is only possible because we are of the nature to change, to be affected by all that is around us. If we were fixed, if we were separate, no waking up of change could occur. So impermanence is Buddha nature, and Buddha nature is impermanence. It's very important. And this doesn't always mean we have to like it, right? The very impermanence that makes us sad sometimes. Getting some lines in my face, my knees are starting to ache when I sit too long, but that's Buddha nature, right? It's not just things that make us happy, it's all things. Although having achy knees beats the alternative of not being around to have achy knees, so I can't complain too much. All these aspects functioning together are Buddha nature. The river cutting into mountain, the mountain diverting the river, the constant interpenetrating change is Buddha nature. Right? He says mountains and rivers, but we have to think those are mountains and rivers interacting together. The river makes the mountain makes the river. Interconnected, interpenetrating, empty of inherent existence, Buddha nature. This is why Dogen changed the saying from all things have Buddha nature to all things are Buddha nature. It makes no sense to say that the activity of a river being diverted has impermanence. It's like it's some separate quality. The river being diverted is impermanence itself, enacting with the mountains and all things, emptiness itself. And this activity is being Buddha nature. This is why I often like to say Buddha naturing instead of Buddha nature. I like making Buddha naturing. It's a verb. It seems to help me not fall into the thingness trap. It's an activity. It's not a thing. Buddha nature is a quality shared by all of us, all phenomena, rather than a thing. Your Buddha nature is no different than my Buddha nature, which is no different than the Buddha nature of the bell. They're exactly the same. I don't possess a little piece of Buddha nature while you look over your little piece of Buddha nature. The bell doesn't have its own little piece of Buddha nature. There's no division of Buddha nature. It's what we and all things are. But it is dualistic to think that there's some big Buddha nature out there somewhere. That's not what I'm saying. Waiting for us to wake up. If we think that Buddha nature is some big thing we have to like merge into, then we're once again making it into a thing, right? So we all have this ability, moment by moment, to engage in a realized response. We could say that we have the potential to wake up, but it's a little further than that. The activity of potentiality is Buddha nature. So the nice thing is, even if we don't get it right, Buddha nature is still happening. And I find that very comforting. I don't feel like I get it right all the time. Maybe not even most of the time, but Buddha nature is still there. That's good. So it's not a, oh, did you become a Buddha? Well, how about now? Well, how about now? That's not what we're talking about. The very moment by moment change, this impermanent, empty of inherent existence functioning that includes the activity of potentiality is Buddha nature. That's nice. So we're, again, not saying that Buddha nature is some big thing or some state that includes everything. As Dogen says, the very impermanency of men and things, body and mind, is Buddha nature. Nature and lands, mountains, rivers are impermanent because they are Buddha nature. So kind of to start to sum things up. So in early Mahayana thoughts like Yogacara or like Huayan in China, each offered profound views of Buddha nature, but it was often treated as like an underlying potential, right? This underlying potential. Yogacara thought that all experiences arrive from this storehouse consciousness, and when it's purified of those negative karmic seeds, a luminous waking mind occurs, and that's Buddha nature. Huayan, on the other hand, along with others, envisioned Buddha nature in cosmic terms. It taught that all phenomena are interpenetrate each other infinitely. And so for these thinkers, Buddha nature is this kind of vast web of mutual reflection and interdependence, the totality of reality itself as seen as Buddha nature. And that's awesome. But I think what Dogen did is he took these quite beautiful kind of philosophical ideas and he really focused on making them, this is something we live, right? Woof, go pet a dog. So he kind of absorbed and transformed these ideas a bit. So in Musho, he says all beings are Buddha nature, and then he immediately adds Buddha nature's impermanence. Like we hit this over and over and over again. Sunyata, Buddha nature, not separate, not different, not Buddha nature overlooking sunyata the other way around, right? Dogen shifts the focus away from any identification of an essence or some cosmic thing to the dynamic activity of reality itself. We live Buddha nature. We are Buddha nature. Buddha nature lives us. Buddha nature is not hidden potential waiting to be revealed, is the living process of existence and time. There's no need to uncover or attain anything. The impermanent activity of life itself is already Buddha nature manifesting. And so Dogen turns what might have been philosophical speculation into a living reality. Some schools might have seen in like this is like the purification of consciousness. Dogen says there is no separate pure mirror behind. I think, has everybody heard the legend of like there's the one poem where he says we have to dust the mirror to keep it clear, and then one of our patriarchs says that there's no mirror to be dusted. So the act of dusting itself is enlightenment. Dogen avoids that dualistic pitfall too. Where some schools might have seen a vast cosmic interconnection, Dogen brings that vision into the immediacy of experience. Each action, each moment fully embodies the entire universe. For Dogen, Buddha nature is not a thing one possesses, but an activity of reality functioning as itself. I'm going to say that again because it was a quote and I really liked it. The activity of reality functioning as itself. The continuous arising and vanishing of phenomena, which is the movement of impermanence. So clean your mirror, but know that that is Buddha nature. Pet a dog, but know that that is Buddha nature. And not the dog or you or the petting, but all of those things. Dogen shows us that Buddha nature is not something to be found, but to be lived. For him, for us, the everyday world of change, impermanence, interdependence is the direct manifestation of awakening itself. The mirror is the dusting is the practice, and the practice itself is Buddha nature. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.